The man who ran Nigeria's justice system for 8 years, the man who was supposed to be the guardian of the law, was thrown out of his own home this week by armed operatives. Not by soldiers, not by thugs, by the very anti-corruption agency that he once had a hand in shaping. But here's the question nobody is really asking. Did the EFCC actually have the legal authority to do what they did? Because Abubakar Malami, former Attorney General, senior advocate of Nigeria, says they didn't. And if he's right, this isn't just a corruption story. It's a story about whether the law in Nigeria actually applies to the people enforcing it. Stay with me, because this one cuts deep. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Naijanewsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me because this one gets interesting. So here's what happened. On Wednesday, March 25, 2026, EFCC operatives executed an enforcement operation at a property in the highbrow Maitama district of Abuja, following what the agency described as a final forfeiture order granted by a federal high court. The operatives, reportedly led by an official named Folarin Dari, arrived in about 5 buses, heavily armed, dressed in the EFCC's distinctive red and black jackets, and barricaded the road leading to Malami's residence at number 2 Coronacor Close, off Amazon Street, Maitama. But this wasn't a surprise read. Malami disclosed that EFCC officials initially stormed the premises on Monday before returning with armed personnel on Tuesday to complete the takeover. So they came, couldn't finish, went back the next day with more firepower and completed the job. Malami addressed journalists at a press conference, confirming that the EFCC had forcibly evicted him and his family from their home, despite ongoing court proceedings over the property. Now, here's the critical detail. The action followed an interim forfeiture order granted on January 6, 2026, but Malami insisted that this order did not authorize eviction or immediate takeover of the property. He disclosed that he had already challenged the forfeiture order before the Federal High Court, with the matter adjourned until April 20, 2026. He argued that since the case was already before the court, the EFCC ought to have exercised restraint rather than taking unilateral enforcement steps. So who is Malami, and why does this matter? He served as Nigeria's chief law officer from 2015 to 2023, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice throughout the entire 8 years of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration. This is not a small fish. This is the man who was once the most powerful legal officer in Nigeria. And the deeper story? This eviction didn't come from nowhere. It's the latest chapter in an investigation that has been building since Tinubu took power. Let's talk about the legal architecture here, because this is where the real battle is being fought. Malami's core legal argument is that the execution of court orders is the exclusive function of court bailiffs and court sheriffs, not a party to the litigation. The EFCC, in his view, has no legal authority to physically enforce forfeiture orders. He described the agency's actions as extrajudicial, arguing that even if a court had expressly ordered the eviction, the EFCC still lacks the legal authority to execute such orders. Now, this is not a frivolous argument. Under Nigerian law, interim forfeiture orders are governed by Section 17 of the Advance Fee Fraud and Other Fraud-Related Offences Act and the EFCC Act itself. The standard procedure is the EFCC obtains an interim forfeiture order, publishes it, the affected party has an opportunity to contest it, and only after a final forfeiture order is confirmed does physical possession change hands, through proper judicial mechanisms. The question is, was there a final forfeiture order, or was the January 6th interim order the basis for this action? Legal analysts noted that enforcement of an expired court order could raise procedural concerns and that such orders typically require renewal before execution. The Federal High Court, sitting in Abuja, had ordered Malami to temporarily forfeit 57 properties linked to him to the federal government. 57 properties. That's an extraordinary number, and it tells you the scale of what the EFCC is alleging here. So there are two live legal questions. Was the order that was enforced valid? And even if it was, did the EFCC have the right to enforce it themselves? This is where it gets complicated and where you need to hold several things in your head at the same time. First, the scale of the allegations. The EFCC charged Malami with money laundering, concealment, and unlawful acquisition of proceeds of illegal activity, 16 counts in total. He is being tried alongside an employee of Rahmania Properties Ltd. And his own son. The EFCC accused the defendants of engaging in multiple transactions between 2015 and 2025, intended to conceal the unlawful origin of billions of naira through bank accounts and property acquisitions across Abuja, Kano, and Kebbi. Document obtained identified approximately 212.8 billion naira in properties traced to Malami. The list includes 30 properties in Kebbi State alone, with a combined estimated value of 162 billion naira, including Rayhan University sites valued at over 90 billion naira. The EFCC accused the Malami family of laundering 8.7 billion naira, to which they pleaded not guilty during arraignment on December 29, 2025. These are not small numbers. Even by the standards of Nigerian high-profile corruption cases, 212 billion naira in alleged property holdings from a man who spent his career as a lawyer and public servant is a significant allegation. But now, here's the political layer that changes how you read everything. The man the EFCC is hunting was once the man who controlled the EFCC. As AGF, Malami had supervisory authority over federal law enforcement. He had a role in the appointment of EFCC leadership, and now the current EFCC chairman, Ola Olukoyede, appointed under Tinubu, is leading the investigation against him. The relationship between these two institutions is not neutral. It never was. Malami claimed the EFCC's searches were retaliatory and linked to his earlier public reference to Chapter 9 of the Justice Ayo Salami Judicial Commission of Inquiry report, which he said indicted EFCC Chairman Ola Olukoyede over his tenure as the Commission's secretary between 2018 and 2020. The EFCC confirmed the operations but rejected claims that they were raids, saying the actions were in furtherance of ongoing investigations. So, Malami went public with material that could embarrass the EFCC chairman, and shortly after, enforcement actions escalated against him. Is that coincidence? Maybe, but in Nigerian politics, timing is never accidental. Now here's the second political layer, the 2027 elections. Malami, a founding member of the All Progressives Congress, recently defected to the African Democratic Congress and declared his intention to contest the 2027 governorship election in Kebbi State. Some opposition members alleged that Malami was being prosecuted for dumping the ruling APC for the ADC and nursing a governorship ambition ahead of 2027. The presidency dismissed allegations of the weaponization of anti-corruption agencies, clarifying that President Tinubu does not issue directives on whom to investigate, arrest, or prosecute. Now, here's what you need to understand about this defense. It's what every presidency says. The question isn't what they say, it's what the timing suggests. Malami left APC. He declared for Kebbi governorship. He was a powerful political figure in the Northwest with real grassroots influence, and now he is facing criminal charges, detention, and eviction from his home, all in the period immediately following his defection. Does that mean the EFCC case is fake? Not necessarily. The allegations are serious and the asset figures are extraordinary. But it does mean that even if the corruption allegations are real, the political motivation for accelerating enforcement right now is also real. Both things can be true simultaneously, and in Nigerian politics, they usually are. The man who spent 8 years overseeing Nigeria's anti-corruption framework now says the anti-corruption agency is operating illegally. Think about that. Malami himself acknowledged that the incident occurred shortly after his release from detention and during a period of increased political visits and support, saying this could be a basis for people to insinuate political persecution, though he stopped short of directly calling it vendetta. A pro-Malami protest was observed in Kebbi State, with youths calling on the EFCC to back off. This tells you that in his home base, he still commands political loyalty. That's relevant to 2027. And what about the silent players? The Tinubu administration gained something from this. A Buhari-era heavyweight neutralized ahead of a difficult election cycle. The northern political establishment is watching what happens to one of their own, and the EFCC, under a chairman with his own battles against allegations, has institutional reasons to demonstrate aggressive enforcement. Everyone in this story has a stake. Nobody is neutral. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Let's zoom out, because this story is bigger than one man's house. This is a test for whether Nigeria's anti-corruption institutions can be trusted as institutions or whether they are tools of whoever is in power. The move generated significant discourse within Nigeria's legal and political circles, with many viewing it as a test of the judiciary's independence. Supporters argued it was a necessary step towards accountability, while critics raised concerns about timing and political undertones. Here's the long-term risk. If every successive government uses the EFCC to go after political opponents from the previous administration, then anti-corruption enforcement stops being about corruption and becomes about power rotation. Today, it's Buhari-era officials. Tomorrow, under another government, it will be Tinubu-era officials. The cycle continues and genuine accountability never arrives. There's also a chilling effect on political defection. If leaving a ruling party brings criminal prosecution and asset forfeiture, then Nigeria's multi-party democracy becomes effectively hollow. Politicians will remain in the ruling party out of fear, not conviction. For investors and the broader economy, the case highlights both the increasing assertiveness of enforcement institutions and the procedural complexities surrounding asset recovery. The outcome will likely shape the credibility of asset forfeiture processes, particularly in high-value real estate cases. And for ordinary Nigerians, the 212 billion naira allegedly linked to one minister represents resources that should have served the public. If the allegations are proven, that is a real and devastating story of public theft. But if the process is politically contaminated, any conviction becomes legally fragile and the assets may never truly be recovered. The biggest casualty in all of this might not be Malami, it might be the credibility of the EFCC itself. Part of the EFCC's investigation relates to the recovery of Abacha loot, specifically the $322.5 million repatriated from Switzerland. Malami was accused of allegedly duplicating recovery fees for funds that were already in the process of being returned before he took office in 2015. This gives the case an international dimension that matters. The Swiss government, the World Bank, and multilateral institutions like the FATF all have interest in how Nigeria manages repatriated assets. Misappropriation of repatriated loot is not just a domestic issue, it sends a signal to international partners about Nigeria's trustworthiness as a recipient of returned assets. Malami himself noted that during his tenure, he oversaw recoveries that contributed to Nigeria's removal from the FATF grey list, a significant achievement in international financial compliance terms. If those same recoveries are now being investigated as corrupt, the international community will be watching very closely. For Nigerians in the diaspora, this case matters to you because it directly affects whether Western governments feel comfortable repatriating more Nigerian frozen assets in the future. Every time a recovery operation is credibly alleged to have been manipulated, it gives foreign governments reason to slow down or complicate future returns. Let me play devil's advocate and then tell you where each argument breaks down. Argument 1. This is pure political persecution. The timing is suspicious, yes. The defection from APC happened before the escalation. But here's what this argument misses. The EFCC filed 16 counts alleging transactions spanning from 2015 to 2025, and investigators plan to call bank representatives, Bureau of Change operators, and financial experts as witnesses. You don't manufacture a case that specific without some evidentiary foundation. Persecution and genuine wrongdoing are not mutually exclusive. A politically motivated prosecution can still be a legally valid one. Argument 2. The EFCC followed the law. There was a court order. This is the EFCC's position and they're entitled to hold it. But Malami's legal argument that even a valid court order cannot be physically enforced by a party to the litigation only by court officers is a serious procedural argument, not a frivolous one. If a federal high court agrees with him on April 20, this eviction may have to be reversed. The legality of the enforcement action is genuinely contested legal territory. Argument 3. Malami is just trying to hide his wealth. Possibly, but the due process argument is not about protecting Malami, it's about protecting the system. If the EFCC can evict anyone from their home based on an interim order while a case is pending, then any Nigerian, not just former ministers, is vulnerable to that same power being used against them. The misconception to avoid is treating this as simply a good versus evil story. It's a story about power, process, and the question of whether Nigerian institutions can enforce accountability without becoming instruments of political vengeance. What should you watch for from here? Most likely next moves. Malami will go back to court, likely seeking a stay of execution on the forfeiture order and challenging the legality of the eviction itself. The April 20 hearing at the Federal High Court is the next critical date. If the court rules against the EFCC's enforcement method, this could set a significant legal precedent limiting how anti-corruption agencies can execute forfeiture orders. The EFCC, meanwhile, will press ahead with the 16-count criminal trial. Their goal is conviction before the 2027 election cycle renders the case politically irrelevant. The Commission is also investigating other landed properties and commercial interests in Kebbi and Abuja suspected to be part of the same asset network. Expect more seizures. Signals to watch. If other Buhari-era officials, particularly those who have defected from APC, start facing similar enforcement actions, that would support the political persecution narrative and could trigger a northern political backlash against Tinubu ahead of 2027. If the April 20 hearing goes in Malami's favor on procedural grounds, watch how the EFCC responds. Do they comply, or do they find ways to maintain possession regardless? That answer will tell you a great deal about where institutional power actually lies in Nigeria right now. Best case, the courts enforce due process, the criminal trial proceeds properly, and if Malami is guilty, a clean conviction follows, building genuine precedent for accountability. Worst case, the case becomes a legal circus. Malami is neither convincingly convicted nor exonerated, and the EFCC's credibility takes lasting damage, making future anti-corruption enforcement harder to take seriously. At the start of this video, I asked one question. Did the EFCC actually have the legal authority to do what they did? Here's my measured answer. We don't know yet, and that uncertainty itself is the story. What we do know is this: Nigeria cannot fight corruption with institutions that behave as if the law doesn't apply to them. Whether Malami is guilty of what he's been charged with will be determined by a court, but whether the EFCC followed its own legal mandate in evicting him, that question is equally important. The rule of law is only as strong as the weakest point at which power decides to ignore it. The real question for every Nigerian watching this isn't "Is Malami corrupt?" It's "What kind of country do we want to be? One where accountability is real and process is respected, or one where who gets prosecuted depends on who your enemies are?" That's the question. Drop your answer in the comments. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor, share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Naijanewsfeed, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.